stop scrolling. Because what you're about to hear is not just a story, it's a symphony of pain, faith, and impossible triumph. Andrea Bocelli isn't just the man who sang Time to Say Goodbye. He's the man who was never supposed to say hello to this world at all. Born with fragile vision, blinded completely by 12, and raised in the quiet shadows of Tuscany, Andrea didn't just survive the darkness. He turned it into music that shook the heavens. He's faced blindness, heartbreak, and judgment. He's lost love at the height of glory. And even now at 66, he continues to endure storms that would silence most people. But he didn't break. He became a light. A voice the world didn't just hear, it felt. This video is not about a celebrity. It's about a man who lived two lives, one the world celebrated, and one the world never saw. A blind boy who became the voice that helped millions find their way through the night. If his voice ever steadied your heart, this is your moment to honor him. Leave a like to show your respect. Because Andrea Bocelli didn't just sing through the darkness. He rewrote what it means to shine. It is devastating to imagine a life condemned to shadows before it ever had a chance to open to the light. But that's exactly where Andrea Bocelli's story begins, not with triumph, but with terror. Before he ever drew his first breath, Andrea was already in danger. While carrying him, his mother Edie suffered a violent, life-threatening attack of appendicitis. Doctors warned her, terminate the pregnancy. They told her the baby might not survive, or worse, might be born with severe complications. But she refused. With the kind of faith that only a mother can summon, she clung to life for both of them. And then, on September 22, 1958, in the quiet Tuscan village of Laiatico, near Pisa, Andrea Bocelli was born. Fragile? Yes, but also a miracle wrapped in skin and silence. That miracle, however, didn't arrive in a castle. It opened its eyes inside a modest farmhouse, nestled between olive groves and whispering vineyards. His father, Alessandro, sold farm equipment and tended vines. His mother stayed home, raising Andrea and his older brother, Alberto, with the kind of strength poverty demands but never explains. From the beginning, life was already dim. Andrea had congenital glaucoma, a rare eye condition that blurred his vision. He could barely see, just hazy outlines, faint silhouettes, and shifting halos of light. While other children learned through sight, Andrea learned through sound. The wind moving through trees, the clinking of tools in the vineyard, the folk songs neighbors sang after a long day's labor. Those sounds painted my world, he would later say, more vividly than sight ever could. He didn't run through fields with wide open eyes. He listened. He memorized. He felt the world instead of watching it. But even that faint light, those blurred outlines and fragments of shape, was not meant to last. And what happened next would change everything. He had so little to begin with, just a faint shimmer of silhouettes, a shadowy outline of the world. But at least he had that. Until one afternoon in 1970, when even that fragile light was stolen by a single soccer ball. Andrea was just 12 years old. He was playing a game most boys dream of, barefoot, shouting, laughing, trying to feel normal. And then it happened. A powerful kick. The ball struck him in the face, squarely in the eyes. He collapsed. Moments later, blood vessels ruptured in his brain. The blurry world he had grown up navigating, those dim shapes, flickering lights, and halos of brightness, went black. Completely. Permanently. That night, the lights went out, and they never came back. Andrea would later describe it in the simplest, most chilling way. That was the moment the real darkness fell. In the hospital, the silence was deafening. No schoolmates. No sun through windows. Just pain and confusion. He lay there, unable to see, unsure if he would ever feel joy again. And then, out of the silence, A sound entered his life that would change it forever. Not a voice in the room. A voice on a record player. Franco Corelli, the legendary Italian tenor. Andrea didn't know who it was at first. He only knew this. It felt unreal. It was as if the heavens themselves were vibrating with emotion. He turned to his mother and asked the question that would define his future. How is it even possible for a human to sing like that? A family helper, Oriana, noticed the awe in his eyes, even though those eyes could no longer see. Days later, she returned with a gift, a record of Corelli's performances. Andrea clutched it like it was gold. He listened again and again, memorizing every breath, every rise, every fall. That record, he would say years later, was a seed planted in the dark soil of despair. That seed grew in silence. While doctors delivered bad news, that voice gave him direction. While others mourned his blindness, Andrea found something else, something even more powerful than sight. Purpose, but this was only the beginning. Because the boy who lost the light was just about to find his voice. Darkness didn't just steal Andrea's vision. It stole his sense of belonging. Because even after the hospital stay ended, the silence followed him. As a teenager, Andrea was sent away to a boarding school for the blind, miles from his family, deep in the cold belly of unfamiliar dormitories. There were 64 boys packed into shared rooms. But Andrea? He felt more alone than ever. He would later whisper, "I lay awake at night, longing for home." The silence was so loud. I had to find a way to make it sing. And he did. Music became his lantern. Not just a pastime, but a lifeline. By day, he navigated the strict routines of the Institute. By night, he poured himself into every sound, every vibration, every note he could feel, hear, and mimic. He didn't just sing, he studied music. He learned to play piano, flute, saxophone, guitar, trumpet, drums. Where others saw blindness as a barrier, Andrea turned it into fuel. He taught himself to hear what most people ignored. Every whisper of harmony, every subtle shift in pitch, every breath before a note. He started performing at small village singing contests, where neighbors gathered not to cheer, but to listen, because when Andrea opened his mouth to sing, people didn't just hear music. They heard something ancient, something aching and eternal. They heard a boy who had turned darkness into resonance. But even as his gift grew, so did his sorrow. Away from home, far from the arms of his mother, and burdened with the weight of feeling different, Andrea's heart carried loneliness like a second shadow. Still, the music kept him alive. Music, he said, was the only way to keep the darkness from winning. It was his rebellion, his rescue, his refuge. Every song he sang in that school was not a performance. It was a cry for light. And while no one could have imagined it yet, that cry would soon become a voice that echoed through cathedrals, opera halls, and stadiums across the world. But first, he'd have to fight his way through one more battlefield, survival. By the early 1980s, Andrea Bocelli had returned to Tuscany, not as a star, not even as a musician, but as a young man determined to prove he could survive. Blindness hadn't broken him. Loneliness hadn't stopped him. But poverty? That was a different kind of pressure. Music was his passion, but passion didn't pay rent. So Andrea made a decision that shocked those who knew him best. He enrolled at the University of Pisa. To study law. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't romantic. But it was practical. And for someone who had already been told he couldn't, practicality meant power. Each day was a war. He carried a tape recorder to capture lectures. He sat for hours while friends read textbooks aloud. He memorized long passages of legal codes by sheer repetition, line by line, word by word. He worked harder than most sighted students could imagine. Law taught me discipline, he would later say. Discipline was my shield. Without it, I could never have survived the stage. But studying didn't keep hunger from knocking Dot, so at night after the lectures, after the legal jargon, after the exhaustion, Andrea would pack up and head into the shadows of Tuscany's underbelly, into the smoky, dimly lit piano bars, where the scent of tobacco clung to your skin and the hum of conversation drowned out everything. He didn't walk in as Andrea Bocelli. He walked in as a blind kid with a borrowed mic, hoping someone would listen. At first, no one did. People talked over him, drank louder than his notes, ignored the boy behind the piano, until he started to sing. His voice, not yet famous, not yet polished, broke through the noise like a prayer cutting through fog. The clinking glasses stopped. Heads turned. And slowly silence filled the room. He earned barely enough to buy a hot meal. But those nights, they gave him something far more valuable than money. They gave him resilience. Those piano bars, he said, were my gym, my battlefield. I learned to sing above the noise, to reach people who weren't even trying to hear me. And it was there, in that smoky haze, beneath cheap lights and unpaid tabs, that Andrea discovered the soul of performance. Not perfection, connection. But while the world outside those bars slept, something inside Andrea was beginning to wake. A dream that wouldn't stay quiet much longer. It wasn't fame that brought Andrea Bocelli his first great love. It wasn't a concert or a television show or a red carpet. It was a piano bar filled with smoke, sweat, and struggle, where a 29-year-old blind law student sang not for applause, but for survival. She was just 17 years old. Her name, Enrica Shenzati, a teenager with wide eyes and no idea that the man behind the piano would one day fill stadiums with his voice. But when Andrea began to sing, Enrica felt the world go still. Later, she would admit, his voice silenced the room, and it silenced me too. What began as a spark lit in the shadows turned into a love strong enough to weather hardship, hunger, and the uncertainty of a life still trying to find its shape. In 1992, after 5 years of quiet devotion, Andrea and Enrica married. Not in luxury, not in front of cameras, but in hope. They were two souls with no spotlight, no promises, just each other. Their early marriage was filled with simple joys. Andrea balancing a court career by day and music by night. Enrica keeping their home filled with warmth, laughter, and the aroma of Tuscan meals waiting when he returned. Then came their two sons, Amos, born in 1995, steady, thoughtful, quiet; Matteo, born in 1997, passionate, expressive, magnetic. Andrea called fatherhood the most profound melody of his life. Between diaper changes and lullabies, he was still performing in bars, still climbing uphill, but at home, he was simply Dad, the blind man with a voice, and a family who believed in him before the world ever did. But then, the world finally did. In 1996, Time to Say Goodbye exploded across Europe, catapulting Andrea into global fame. The man who once sang to a handful of bar patrons was suddenly performing for millions. And as the lights got brighter, the home got quieter. There were nights when Enrica made dinner for 4, only to pack Andrea's plate away untouched. Nights when she fell asleep with the kids beside her, while her husband was an ocean away chasing destiny. What had started in silence now began unraveling in it. Andrea's love for his family never faded. But his career, the destiny he had fought so hard to claim, was relentless. He once said, "Fame gave me everything I dreamed of, but it also took what I could never replace." In 2002, after 10 years of marriage, Andrea and Enrica quietly parted ways. No scandals, no media circus, just heartbreak. "I will never speak ill of her," Andrea said gently. "She gave me 2 sons and 10 years of my life. That's not bitterness. That's the sound of a man who understands the price of greatness, who knows that even when love breaks, it can leave behind a melody that still plays, and that melody lives on not in photographs, but in Amos and Mateo. But just when the music of love seemed to have faded, life was about to write a second verse. It was supposed to be just a demo, just a blind man behind a piano, helping out with a track no one expected to hear. But that one recording, that one moment changed everything. In 1992, Italian rock singer Zucchero Fornaciari needed a powerful tenor to record a demo of a new song called Miserere. The plan was simple. Send the demo to Luciano Pavarotti, the biggest name in opera, and see if he'd sing it. But when Pavarotti heard the demo, he didn't ask about the song. He asked about the singer. Who is this man? Why do you need me? When you already have him? That voice, raw, aching, alive, was Andrea Bocelli. And in that moment, his double life ended. No more courtrooms by day and piano bars by night. Music not law was now his destiny. Zucchero took him on tour across Europe. And for the first time, Andrea stood on real stages. No longer fighting for attention in smoky rooms, now commanding silence in packed arenas. But the crowds didn't quiet his nerves. Behind the curtain, Andrea trembled. Panic followed me on stage for decades, he admitted. I feared every note until the final bow. The world saw a rising star. Andrea still saw a blind boy battling the fear of being exposed. But then came Sanremo, Italy's most prestigious music festival. In 1994, Bocelli entered as a newcomer. He sang Il mare calmo della sera, the calm sea of the evening, and the crowd went still. Not from surprise, but from reverence. He didn't just win Sanremo. He declared his arrival. His debut album followed. Then his second. Then, in 1996, the song that would become his eternal anthem, Con te partiro. And in its English form, Time to Say Goodbye, performed alongside Sarah Brightman, it didn't just climb charts, it shattered them. It became a global phenomenon, selling over 12 million copies, becoming the best-selling single in German history, playing at weddings, funerals, Olympic ceremonies, and royal events. It was no longer just a song. It was the sound of farewell, rebirth, and beauty, all in one note. From stadiums in Germany to cathedrals in Rome. Andrea's voice shook the world, but success came with critics. Classical purists called him too soft, too pop, not opera enough. They questioned his training, his tone, his place among the legends, for a man who had once fought to be heard at all. Those wounds cut deep, but Andrea stood firm. Art is not about rules, he said. It's about emotion. If my voice reaches the heart, then it has done its work. He wasn't trying to be like Pavarotti. He was trying to be Andrea. And the world listened. Because what came next was bigger than music. It was the rise of a living legend. As Andrea's voice soared to unthinkable heights, filling coliseums, echoing across continents, bringing tears to millions. Something else was quietly unraveling behind closed doors. At home, silence had replaced music. The man who once sang lullabies to his sons was now performing for royalty. The same man who used to sit for family dinners was missing those dinners altogether. His wife, Enrica, had loved him long before the world did. She had fallen for the blind pianist in a smoky bar, not the global superstar. And now, the man she once knew was being pulled away by applause. Their Tuscany, once filled with the giggles of toddlers and the smell of pasta on the stove, began to feel like a museum. Andrea was always on the road: rehearsals, interviews, sold-out concerts. And when he came home, his heart was still jet-lagged, still buzzing from the stage. She tried to hold the family together. She laid out his dinner plate. She tucked their sons into bed, often without him. He would call from hotel rooms in New York, Paris, Tokyo, his voice tender but distant. He heard his sons' voices deepen through the phone. Milestones missed. Birthdays celebrated without him. Moments he could never get back. Andrea later admitted. Fame gave me everything I had dreamed of. But it also took what I could never replace. There were no explosive fights. No tabloid betrayals. Just two people quietly drifting, caught in the undertow of a destiny too big to share. In 2002, after a decade of marriage, Andrea and Enrica parted ways. He did not blame her. She did not resent him. They simply could not go on. And when asked about it later, Andrea didn't throw stones. He spoke softly, with reverence. I will never speak ill of Enrica. She gave me 2 sons and 10 years of my life. That isn't heartbreak coated in bitterness. It's heartbreak drenched in gratitude. Because even though the marriage ended, the music it created never did. Amos and Matteo, 2 sons born in the glow of young love, would become Andrea's deepest connection to his past and most powerful bridge to his future. And in time, they wouldn't just carry his name. They would carry his song. But before that legacy could unfold, another unexpected love would walk into Andrea's life and quietly change everything. The echoes of his first marriage faded. Andrea Bocelli found himself surrounded by fame, yet quietly haunted by absence. The world called his name louder than ever. But at home, the rooms were quiet. No one waited at the door. No one filled the silence when the spotlight dimmed. In 2002, at a private dinner party, Andrea, then 44 years old, heard a voice. Not a song. A woman. Her name, Veronica Berti. She was just 18. The age gap was undeniable. But what passed between them that night wasn't calculation. It was connection. Instant, unmistakable, electric. Andrea would later say with his usual honesty, it was love at first sight. That night, we stayed together. What could have been dismissed as a fleeting spark turned into something far deeper, something quietly unshakable. Veronica didn't enter Andrea's life to be saved. She came to stand beside him. She didn't flinch at his blindness. She didn't cower in the shadow of his fame. She walked toward it and toward him with quiet strength. Soon, she became more than a partner. She became his manager, his guide, his compass. A hand behind every tour. The presence behind every curtain. The calm in his storm. To the world, Andrea was the immortal tenor. To Veronica, he was still a man who trembled before performances, who carried the trauma of childhood darkness, who missed his sons deeply. They shared a life without rushing to define it. No tabloids. No wedding headlines. For over a decade, they stayed together, not by ceremony, but by choice. Then in 2012, their love brought a miracle, a daughter named Virginia. For Andrea, already a father of 2 sons, Virginia was something new. A second spring, a softness he didn't know he needed. Her laughter, he once said, fills the house in a way applause never could. 2 years later, in 2014, Andrea and Veronica married in a quiet ceremony at the sanctuary of Montenero, overlooking the Tuscan Sea. No red carpet. No paparazzi. Just love, family, and the faith that had always guided him. And Veronica didn't stop at being his wife. She became executive vice president of the Andrea Bocelli Foundation, turning his fame into action-building schools, funding healthcare, creating change. Andrea once said, "Faith has always been my compass. But Veronica is the one who keeps me walking in its direction. She is not the woman behind the man. She is the woman beside him, the one who sees his scars and still sees his light." And together, they wrote not a new love story, but a second symphony, stronger, steadier, and built to endure. If Amos was the anchor, then Matteo born in 1997, was the echo, tall, charismatic, and gifted with a voice hauntingly similar to his father's. Matteo had the same ache, the same warmth, but with a modern edge. He trained quietly for years, perfecting his tone at the conservatory, hiding in the shadows of a legend. Until he was ready. And in 2018, he stepped into the light. The father-son duet, Fall on Me, went viral. In the video, Andrea sits at the piano. Matteo stands beside him. 2 generations. 1 bloodline. 1 voice passed like a torch. Millions watched. Millions wept. And when Andrea gently rests his hand on Matteo's, you realize? That was not a performance. It was a promise. Matteo has his own path, Andrea once said. But when I sing with him, it feels like my voice is being extended into the future. And then came Virginia, born in 2012, the miracle of Andrea's second love. If Amos is logic, and Matteo is legacy, Virginia is light. She's the laughter in the hallways, the softness in Andrea's heart, the child who brought color back into a home once shadowed by heartbreak. At just 8 years old, she stood beside her father on live television and sang Hallelujah. Her small, trembling voice rose beside his like dawn against nightfall, delicate but fearless. Andrea held her gently, his arm wrapped around her, as if trying to shield the moment from time itself. It was more than a duet. It was a revelation. Her laughter fills the house in a way applause never could, he said softly. In Virginia, Andrea found the joy of starting over, without regret, together. These 3 children are not just Andrea Bocelli's legacy. They are his life's greatest composition, not written in sheet music, but in shared moments, in hugs, in harmonies, in memories. And maybe that's why, after all the awards and sold-out arenas, Andrea's greatest performances happen at home, where Amos plays, Matteo sings, and Virginia laughs, because the voice that once sang alone in the dark now sings in harmony with those he loves most. For decades, Andrea Bocelli's voice had lifted millions through heartbreak, loss, and moments too painful to explain. But even voices that bring healing are not immune to being wounded. In 2020, as the world shut down under the weight of a global crisis, Andrea, like many artists, was left stranded in silence. No stages, no applause, just an eerie stillness that blanketed Italy and the world. And then, at a small gathering, Andrea did what few celebrities dared to do. He spoke from the heart. He questioned the harshness of the lockdowns. He mourned the loss of connection, the empty churches, the quiet concert halls. But he didn't speak as an icon. He spoke as a father, a neighbor, a man who missed hugging his daughter, yet within hours, his words were everywhere. Not as compassion, but controversy. Headlines exploded. Critics called him careless. Some fans turned cold. The very man who had once stood alone in the vastness of Milan's empty Duomo singing Amazing Grace to the world was now accused of insensitivity. But behind the headlines was no villain. Just a human being, exhausted, emotional, and trying to make sense of a broken world. Andrea didn't respond with anger. He didn't launch a defense. Instead, he said quietly, I did not mean to offend. I spoke from emotion, not disrespect. No press spin. No shouting match. Just humility. But that wasn't the only storm. For years, whispers had circled through the media. Was his blindness being romanticized? Was his story being used as a marketing tool? Some even suggested his struggle had been packaged, that the man behind the mic had become a brand, rather than a person. That narrative cut deeper than criticism about his voice ever could. Because for Andrea, blindness was never a gimmick. It was a reality. One he had fought through since he was a child. One that had shaped every note he sang. He answered simply, I do not want to be seen as a miracle. I want to be seen as a musician. And that was the truth. His family, too, stood behind him. They knew the rehearsals, the failures, the panic attacks. They knew that the stage never gave him anything easily, that everything he achieved came not from pity, but from perseverance. The stage that gave him ovations also gave him scrutiny, and he chose again and again not to meet it with defensiveness, but with grace. Music, he once said, is born from suffering, but it must bring peace. That's what makes Andrea Bocelli different. Not the purity of his voice, but the clarity of his character. He never claimed to be perfect. He simply chose to let dignity sing louder than the noise, because the storms came. But Andrea never let them steal his melody, not at 66 years old. Andrea Bocelli no longer lives in the shadows that once tried to claim him. He now wakes each morning in Villa Alpamare, a seaside sanctuary in Tuscany, where the waves kiss the shore like the whisper of a piano note. His days are filled with music, faith, family, and above all, peace. He rides horseback through the hills he once feared he'd never see. He walks under the sun, surrounded by laughter, not silence. And in the evenings, his villa fills with songs, sometimes from him, sometimes from his children. Not stages, not microphones, just a man and his family, living the harmony he once thought he'd never have. Across the street, the Alpamare Beach Club hosts guests, friends, and artists from around the world. It reflects his philosophy that beauty should be shared. That legacy isn't just in what you build, it's in who you lift. His foundation, guided by his wife Veronica, continues to bring education and health care to places that have neither. He has turned applause into action and fame into service. His vineyard bottles the soil of his childhood. His performances, now shared with Matteo and Virginia, are no longer solo acts. They're testaments to love passed down. And his voice? It still soars. He tours. He records. He performs at sacred festivals, global arenas, and the Teatro del Silenzio, the silent valley of his birth that roars to life once a year in his honor. But what endures most isn't the fame. It isn't the awards, or even the unforgettable songs. It's the unbreakable vow Andrea made to himself when he was just a blind boy lost in darkness. Even if I cannot see the light, I will become it. And he did. He became the note that comforted strangers, the melody that helped others say goodbye, the voice that proved silence is never final. So when Andrea Bocelli sings today, it's not performance, it's prayer. It's a promise that even through heartbreak, even through blindness, even through storms, there is still beauty waiting to rise. Because his life is no longer just a story of struggle. It's a symphony of survival. And when the final curtain falls, long after the lights go out and the crowds go home, Andrea Bocelli's voice will still echo, not just in recordings, but in the hearts of those he lifted. Through Amos, Matteo, and Virginia. Through every student his foundation supports. Through every soul comforted by his voice. He will never truly say goodbye.